welcome everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. You know, I think one of the primary goals of every parent is to pass on to their children the wisdom they have gained after decades of life experience. Well, our guest today, David Dennis, has done just that. He wrote a book originally intended for his 5 children that has now become a life guide for all of us, young and old. In his book, Gameness, David Dennis offers 4 very practical and immensely powerful principles for a life worth living. David is the president and chief executive officer of Eckerd Connects, one of the nation's largest nonprofits focusing on helping people in poverty get out of poverty. Their tactics include providing workforce skills, development, juvenile justice, and child welfare services across the country. David is a licensed professional counselor, marriage and family therapist, and child care administrator. So with that, let's bring our special guest on today, David Dennis. Welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Charlie, thanks for having me on your show. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it will be fun. After our chat earlier this week or last week, I've lost track of times, but I'm very interested, and I think our audience will gain so much. So before we get into the powerful tools and principles that you provide in your book, Gameness, I think you are doing an exciting work with poverty and with at-risk children and vulnerable families. And I think it would be good to get an understanding a bit about your organization, the one that you lead. I love your approach that you told me was to find people living on the edge of poverty and then assist them with the skills and the attitudes that they will need to prevent poverty in their households or in their individual lives. Can you talk to me a bit about your organization and your ministry?
Absolutely. Charlie, you know, a quick personal note to lead into talking about Eckerd Connects and the work that I do in that organization with our team. What led me into the work that I do was a bit of my own personal journey, and we could talk about more of that when we talk about Gameness. But I originally began work in social services with children as a volunteer mentor to kids that were going through a lot of the challenges that I went through. I lost my father, who died when I was very young, and then lost my mother, who cratered under the weight of alcoholism after his loss, and then lost my sister and my home when I was removed by Child Protective Services from her home and placed with different families. And
so you experienced sort of an orphan experience, not right. Precisely, but it was an orphaned experience.
Oh yeah, without question. By age 5, I had lost my dad, my mom, my sister, my home. I was placed in a different home, but ultimately got reunited after that next year with my sister, and we got raised by the same family. So for me, when I got older, 19, 20 years old, and wanted to get back, it was really kind of the pain that I could identify with kids that were going through that drew me into working with kids in social services. I started out as a volunteer mentor in a Big Brother, Big Sister program. Mm-hmm. Ultimately got my clinical license and started counseling kids, and that became a clinical director. That evolved into eventually being a program director and ultimately a CEO of this organization where I am now. But about 10 years ago, myself and our team and our board, and we did a lot of work, most of our work with children that were in the foster care system and juvenile justice system. But one of the things that we came to realize is that these thousands of kids that we were attempting to help, and we were helping them, but the majority of them came from the same place. If you kind of what we call move upstream a little bit, you find that many of them all came from poverty. So we just decided that we wanted to do more than we had been doing to prevent children and families from getting tangled up in the foster care system. There's about 250,000 children get dumped into the foster care system in America every year. and about 700,000 teenagers get arrested every year. So it's a real epidemic problem in our society, and so we wanted to do something that was more preemptive. And so we decided that we're not going to stop the flood of poverty's misery by more sandbags of social services and juvenile jails, if you will. So we decided we wanted to build a dam, and that dam was going to be a way to help these families get out of poverty through employment and build a pathway to their future success, hopefully. So for the last 10 years, our organization has morphed more into, as you mentioned earlier, workforce development, job skills training, Job Corps services, even though we do still serve some in foster care and juvenile justice. Been around 54 years, founded by an entrepreneur and his wife, Jack and Ruth Eckerd, formerly magnates of the Eckerd drugstore chain, which they later sold to what's now known as CVS. We operate in 20 states in the District of Columbia, and we serve about 30,000 clients a year and almost 3,000 employees. And so that gives you a bit of we have about 106 programs around those 20 states. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the scope of our work, how I got into it, and what I do professionally.
Oh, that, I find that so meaningful, and I like the idea of, you using the word upstream. We used to use it in oil, and that was upstream was drilling, and downstream was refining and getting it to the customer. But upstream is where the action happens. It happens. You're attacking the problem essentially before there's a critical problem. You're seeing the indicators of the problem and trying to deal with it before they end up in poverty, homelessness, and orphans. I think that's a brilliant idea, and it really excites me. As a quasi-orphan myself, that really fits much of my passion. Now, I know you in reading about you, you talk about working with at-risk families, but your primary focus seems to be on at-risk or vulnerable kids and orphans. Is that correct?
It has been most of my career, Charlie, but our focus, as I said, more recently has been with really getting into neighborhoods and communities, both rural and urban, where people are really struggling with a lack of opportunity for economic equity and a lack of opportunity for employment, and really focusing on trying to help them succeed. That was always Mr. and Ms. Eckerd's vision for our organization, was to ensure that every child and family has an opportunity to succeed. And that's really given us a more focused lens.
Yeah, I see. And I like the idea of being more focused, because so many times in our charities and our nonprofits and our ministries, we kind of want to be everything to everybody, and that means you're nothing to nobody.
Charlie, those words are so powerful, and I really believe what you just said is so important for so many nonprofit social services organizations to hear, because they are so important in our society right now. And the reason I believe they are, Charlie, is because, like myself included, there was never a day that I worked with kids in foster care in the juvenile justice system. And as I said, we still do some of that. But it always felt honorable. It always felt meaningful. It was always a passion. I so identified with the pain that these kids were going through in these families. But one of the things that happens accidentally, it's not by intent, obviously, but at least for me, I'll speak for myself, and I was a therapist, and we talk so much with these kids, counseling them and trying to help them, and you're kind of triaging them with the trauma they've gone through, the painful experiences they've gone through, and while you're dealing with them, you don't mean to, but you almost begin to interact with them as a problem to be solved rather than a potential to be realized.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's quotable. Not a problem to be solved, but a potential to be realized. I love that. That is so honoring to people in the image of God. It is just
absolutely. Absolutely. And it's the thing is, we work with these kids and counsel them, and I came to the point that I realized so many of these kids I've worked with over the years, they're experts on their past, and all the pain and all that they've gone through and all the sorrow and all their dysfunction in the family, and they know more about family of origin issues and trauma-informed care than we do. But as Kierkegaard said, for life to be understood, it must be understood backwards. And that's true. We do need to understand, all of us need to understand ourselves by reflecting back. But he said for life to be lived forward, to be lived, it must be lived forward. So, but we spent way too much time, I feel like, helping the kids to become clinical experts, but we don't spend enough time talking with them about what their hopes or dreams and aspirations for their life are, their passion for their future. And as you're a person that's a person of faith, one of my favorite verses in the scriptures is, without a vision, the people shall perish.
Yes.
And it's important that we help young people identify their potential, their possibilities. While they may have gone through difficult times like I had, the rest of their canvas hasn't been painted on, and we need to give focus. Many of these kids have actually never had anyone ask them, hey, what do you think that you'd like to be one day, or what is your dream for your future, or your purpose and your aspirations?
And they have no idea, I bet. I bet that they can't even address the question.
But some of them, we don't think about this because we talk to our own children about those things all the time. But for these kids, sometimes it's the most validating thing they've ever heard, because in their minds, they're thinking, wow, this guy must think I could become something because he's asking me what I would like to become. And so it's at least a beginning point. And so I find that very exciting. It's also connection with why I wrote this book.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that. I've got a lot of questions about why you wrote that book. But, it's reminding me of the words of St. Paul in the great love chapter in Corinthians 13, where he says, faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. But, we'll talk a lot about faith, we'll talk a lot about love, but hope doesn't seem to get a lot of attention. And yet hope, without a vision, you will perish. Without hope, in something better, you just feel a victim. You feel stuck. You feel you can't move forward. And you are giving people hope. And not just mere words, but you're giving them principles, actions, tools, and to understand who they are and what their potential in society can be, and in their personal life.
Yesterday, I met a gentleman in our Denver, Colorado program, and I won't mention his name, but he just got out of 15 years in prison. He's in one of our adult programs, actually, returning to the community, and he's in our workforce development program. But he learned how to weld when he was in prison. He did address the issues that took him to prison, and he did his time, and he went through counseling and really came to understand a lot of the dynamics that led to his thinking and decisions he made. But I was still grateful to know they really focused on his future and his possibilities of his future. He learned how to weld, and he showed me his portfolio of his welding projects that he had done, his resume that he had made, and just to see the sparkle in his eye and to see the hope in his face. And I just gave him a big hug, because I just said, man, I'm so proud of you. And that's so exciting to me, because many of these folks that have headed down the wrong path, they aren't being engaged at a level that's focused on their future. It's too focused on their past, in my opinion.
And we'll wrap it up with this. I do a lot of work in poverty in Africa, in the country of Uganda. And people in poverty have no sense of tomorrow. That's an American word. That's a first world word, because every day is exactly the same. So, they're doing the same tasks, the same things. There's nothing new coming in. They don't have anything to look forward to come up, and, to come up in the world or do something different or do something more exciting. And so hope is an unknown word, because there is no sense of tomorrow, and that is what poverty does. There is no sense of tomorrow. It is just the same thing day by day, over and over and over. And what you are doing is you're showing there is a tomorrow. there is a tomorrow, and it can be better, more productive, more enriching than it is today. I just love what you're doing. So what I want to do now is I want to focus the remainder of our time on your book. I want an introduction to your book. We'll take a break, and then we're going to get into the details of your book. But I want to talk about the principles in your book, and I was actually very intrigued by the way it started, based on your life and the ministry and social services part of your life. You have learned so much valuable wisdom about what it takes to live a meaningful life. And you told me that the project began as sort of a manual of life for your kids. Is that right? Was that the initial thoughts?
Yes, it was.
So how did it evolve into a book that says, oh my goodness, this is not just for my kids, this is for the world at large? What was that evolutionary process of going from one audience to another?
Charlie, I had this hole that I've never been able to fill, and when you lose your family and parents, you understand part of that yourself and that you went through personally. There's just certain things you're not going to ever recover or replace. But one of those was I never had a conversation with my dad, no memories of him sharing life lessons learned, wisdom, stories. And I wanted to leave something behind for my kids, kind of that conversation I never got to have with my dad. But I wanted to leave them something that was meaningful, and I decided that I wanted to leave them a manual, if you will, that would, from my perspective, kind of my life, the years I've lived, lessons I've learned working, leading others, being led, lessons I've learned from counseling thousands of people over the years, both in private practice counseling, but also the thousands of families I've worked with. As you alluded to earlier, I've observed a lot of lives, and I wanted to kind of glean from all that and say to my kids, if I had to boil it all down, what would be the most important nuggets that I would pass on you? To say, if you live out these characteristics, these attributes, these principles, this mindset, if you will, you'll have your best chance of living your best life and living your life to your fullest potential. And it'll serve as a safeguard of you ever becoming a victim in your own life, of being robbed of your full potential. So that's where it started, and my kids really prodded me after they started reading parts of it to share it more broadly. And that's how it happened.
What a great story. David, I have been for over a year in the process of writing a book, and I can't tell you how many times, how many beginnings and chapters that I've thrown away. And it's a faith-oriented book, and my working title is A History of Love, and I believe love began with the Creator, and I'm very Trinitarian. St. Bonaventure, who wrote 1,000 years ago, has influenced me tremendously in Trinity. And I wanted to write to my son, who has questions, of faith questions, and I wanted to write it to him, and as I've studied more and more, I realized this is a book that is in need. In our declining church, this is a book that's in need for more people to read. So I understand that. As I talked to my son, he said the same thing, write this book for me, but this book is for other people. And I think you have so much to bring to the table. And so before we get into the details of your 4 powerful principles, I'd like to take a brief break, and then we will come right back into it.
Sounds great.
Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you are listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie. And I am feeling, as our podcast is going, I'm feeling that we really have a powerful show today with David Dennis and his book, Gameness, which is subtitled, help me get this right, I have the subtitle, Gameness is landing on your feet, not on your feelings. And we're going to have some great discussions on that because, my feeling about feelings is very strong. And so we will have wonderful discussions. But in your book, David, you provide 4 principles, and I will read the principles, and then I want to go into depth into each principle because they're very powerful. And your 4 principles, and much of it has to do, in my reading and checking it out, much of it has to do with resisting falling into victimhood. That one of the troubles with poverty is this sense of victimhood, and there's nothing I can do. And you say, absolutely you can. Here is upgrade your perspective with a never quit mindset. Fulfill your potential with a resolution to a purpose. Tackle your problems with a fighting spirit, and master your performance with the will required to act. Those are, David, those are divine. Those are fine principles. They're very fine principles. Way to go. I congratulate you on those. That every one resonates with me.
Well, Charlie, thanks, but I got to say right off, I know you would agree, they're certainly not my principles, they're not my truths. I do have a deep burden and great passion around bringing focus to them, especially in our society at this time. As I began to share it with the broader audience at the persistence of my kids, you mentioned earlier about the hopelessness that you witness in your trips to Uganda with your mission work there. And, I was reading some statistics recently, and it's really, there's a great deal of hopelessness in our own country, and it really is my hope that any listeners listening today or to the show, above everything else, as much as I love talking about these principles, I really, truly hope that anyone listening to the show, because you never know who is, that anyone out there that's struggling with feeling like quitting and giving up because of the circumstances in their life, or because of a lack of purpose, or because of whatever problems they're facing or winning the battle today, or their feelings are winning the battle over their will, that hopefully these words would bring hope and encouragement to those of you that are listening. But the statistics, Charlie, that I read, this really, I just had to read them again, but I read 1.2 million suicide attempts this year in the United States. That's a lot of hopelessness. 10 million adult arrests in America this year. 700,000 teenagers arrested in America. 250,000 children entering the foster care system. 700,000 marriages ending in divorce this year. And the number one cause of death this year, heart disease, linked to obesity and inactivity. So I don't know that there's ever been a more important time in our society to talk about a never quit mindset, resoluteness to a purpose, a fighting spirit, and having the will required to act beyond your feelings.
Well, let's get into it because those are very cool. So let's start with your first principle, which is, as you write in your book, it's upgrade your perspective, but with a never quit mindset. That right there is worth a podcast. So talk to me about that, because not only do we have a never quit, we also, would you not say, with many people in poverty, we have a never start mindset.
And Charlie, I would say this applies to people that are not only in poverty economically, but as you know, there are so many people all around us that are in poverty of hope. They're in poverty of fulfillment. They may have a lot of money, but they're in poverty of feeling like their life is making an impact in this world. And so a never quit mindset is important for all of us. And I think that the easiest way for me to describe that principle is, for all of us, whether it be events, life is uncertain, unfair, and oftentimes unpleasant, right? For all of us.
Yeah, like
so
regularly.
Our circumstances are out of our control. None of us had anything to do with getting to Earth, and we don't have any control over events that come our way every day. And so I always like to tell people, when I'm talking about a never quit mindset, upgrading your perspective is what this is about, because it's about learning how to see things better, even if you can't see better things yet.
That's interesting.
So, I was visiting a friend of mine who has apple orchard and a Christmas tree farm. He's a retired political attorney in Vermont. Broke my leg skiing first day visiting him there, drinking lots of his apple cider out of his fridge. And I asked him,
"Oh, you bummed me out. I thought you were going to tell me you're drinking lots of his whiskey."
This I'll tell you, this cider is like the nectar of the gods. And I told him, I said, I've never asked anyone, but I said, there's got to be some specific way you select just the very best apples to make cider. How do you do that? And he cocked his head and kind of grinned and laughed, and he said, well, you don't have a clue how cider is made. And I said, no, I'd love to know that. And he said, well, the irony of it is apple cider is made from the apples that are the damaged, bruised, ugly apples that get knocked off the tree by storms, or the pickers accidentally knock them off, or they get packed too tight in a box. And so they don't make it to the store with the perfect shiny apples that go to the produce shelf. So we repurpose them by putting them into the apple press, the cider press, and they end up still making it to the store, but they're in a jar. I thought, wow, how crazy is that the best tasting thing I've ever tasted that comes from an apple comes from the bruised and damaged apples. And I went to bed that night, and I just had this epiphany. It's a lot like how God works in our lives, isn't it? He redeems us. And I love that verse in Romans that says that God works all things together for good to those that love him and are committed to his purposes. It doesn't say all things are good. It says that he works all things together for good. And that illustration of that apple cider is maybe the best illustration I could give to how the point I'm trying to make here is none of us, including myself, the life circumstances that I came up through life with, I had nothing to do with that, but I had to decide if I was going to lay on the ground and rot because I got bruised, or if I was going to make cider and let my life be repurposed and still accomplish good things. And that's why I decided to get involved working with children and families that were going through what I went through. I was determined to redeem the pain that I went through and see my journey of what I went through. I had to see it better. Those events were never going to change. They were never going to be better events. The trauma that I went through, the orphaning that I went through, the abandoning that I went through. But my perspective could be made different. And then that could allow for me, based on seeing that differently, to see, hey, how can I make cider out of what I've gone through? And everyone can do that.
You know, that's if I may, jestingly, that's a delicious metaphor. I mean, it really works, and it is, our growth is found in. I read this from sort of a priest prophet in the United States, is very popular today, Richard Rohr, and Richard says this, that Jesus says the only way to achieve union with God is through failure, vulnerability, and repair. And that is what we're talking about, isn't it? It's about redeeming the bruised. It's about transforming the bruised into full life and real life. And as we both know, as business guys and servants and ministers, that our greatest learnings come from our failures, our difficulties, our trials, and that ends up to be the bright and shining parts of our life. And for those, I can imagine the challenge for you of telling somebody in poverty that this is the beginning of your next life. These are the roots from it. You will grow from this. You will learn from this. You will refer back to this and know what your teachings are. It's the upside down thinking. You know, Rohr calls it the upside down gospel. But it is the upside down way of thinking, is it not?
It is. It's helping people to understand that the end of the road doesn't mean a dead end. It very well could mean a detour to their dream.
Yeah, a detour, a detour, but always a learning. Yeah, I just believe life is, everything that happens in my life is a growth opportunity.
We have to seek that, though.
That's the never quit mindset, is it not? That's a never quit.
Bingo. Yep. We have to choose to do that. We're all familiar with Viktor Frankl.
Of course.
That many of us read in college.
Yeah. Man's Search for Meaning. Yeah.
And that liberating, powerful truth that he came to realize while he was in the Nazi prison camp, that, you could rob him of his freedom, and you could have total control over all of his activities, everything about his life except one thing. You could not control and determine how he was going to respond.
Right.
To how you treated him.
Right.
And that's the most liberating truth any of us can ever discover. We have total control how we respond to any set of circumstances that we encounter.
Okay, love it. Never quit mindset. So let's move on to your fulfill your potential. And that assumes that you believe you have a potential. I think so many people in poverty don't believe they have a potential. They that's why I said so much of what you write about is resisting victimhood. They feel they're a victim and they can't fulfill a potential. But you suggest to discover a resolution to a purpose. Discover a purpose and be resolved to accomplish that. Tell me more.
It simply put, it means identifying something important enough to you to demand all of you. It means taking the time to ask yourself, what is valuable in your life? What is important in your life? What do you believe in life? What we believe matters. And so many people have never taken time to do that. Many people have never taken time to say, what is my highest aspiration? What is the potential of my life? What is my purpose, my unique purpose in life? And I tend to use the word purposes because I think we have more than just one. I think
Absolutely.
We have one ultimate purpose in glorifying God if you're a believer, but even if you're not, for many people, we spend a lot of our time, Charlie, when we're born, we didn't choose to get here, and when we got here, the entire childhood we lived through until we become a young adult, life's happening to us. We didn't choose our parents, our family, our neighborhood, our zip code, our genetic code, our height, our color of our eyes. No defining characteristics on our driver's license that did we have anything to do with. So life has happened to us all of our life, and so we begin to develop kind of a self-perception, a worldview, beliefs that we begin to act out. But many of them are reactionary form beliefs and decisions and choices because we have formulated these beliefs and values based on reacting to things happening to us. And I did that myself. I had a lot of rebellious reactions because of the things I went through as a kid and feeling abandoned and, desperately seeking approval and those kind of things before I came to my faith in Christ and my discovering my ultimate purpose in life. So many people are living their life really in a reactionary way. They've never really stopped to say, hey, what is my purpose in life? If people are drifting.
Yeah, and I would even add, to your saying our purpose is to glorify God. We do that by administrating the purpose He has given to us. And when we fulfill that purpose, it does glorify God. Now, here's a question that I have for you that's a ponderous, deep question. When it comes to purpose, people in poverty, that's a brand new word for them. That's a brand new concept. And you say many of us who live more in upper middle, and higher class, purpose means something. We've been taught the American dream and that purpose. But when you're in poverty, when you're in destitute poverty, you have no purpose. How do you introduce that to purpose. Do you have a story of a child that you have taken who felt purposeless, and that you helped them discover a purpose to change their life?
To me, Charlie, the most liberating thing about purpose, and I'll say this, I do know a lot of people in poverty that they do know their ultimate purpose, and I know a lot of people in poverty who have a very strong faith, but they haven't had the opportunities to build a pathway out of poverty through employment and through discovering their God-given gifts and talents where they can go and work and at that level. So there's kind of two different levels for me in that regard. There's your ultimate purpose, but on a practical level, what like you said, the expression of how you do that through your unique gifts and talents and those things you do, many people in poverty don't get that opportunity, whether it's lack of education, a lack of introduction to a mentor or apprenticeship opportunity, because of where they're born. I mean,
they have no idea of their gifts and talents. They don't know what are my gifts and talents.
I'll tell you this, Charlie. I've worked with countless youth that have never gotten up in the morning and watched a mom and dad get up and get dressed and go to work. They were raised by a grandmother or a relative or a mom or a dad that they got up and they had substance abuse issues. Maybe they went and got a government check or government food. But many children I've worked with have never known, they've never seen it modeled what it means to get up, get dressed for work, and go to a job or talk about that. They have no concept. They have no clue of it.
So what do you do to inform them of that, to encourage them with that if they've never seen it, never felt it, don't even really know that it exists? What tactics or processes do you use to help them understand that they do have a purpose?
One of the things that is great about workforce development and job skills training and helping young people get connected to those opportunities is, when you go to work, and but for those of us that grew up working since we were young kids, I'm sure you probably were the same as me. I've been working since I was preteen. But what happens when you go to work is you have a mentor. It's called your boss, and you learn how to be a part of a team. They're called your coworkers. You learn how to problem solve, and you learn everybody's unique responsibility is really important. Even if you're a busser in a restaurant, you bust a table, and if you don't get the table bust, your waiter can't get more people set at their table, and they can't make their tips, and you can't get your portion of those tips. And the dishes have got to get to the back and get cleaned. The food's got to get out hot on time. And you discover all these things that if you don't ever work, you don't get those opportunities. So work itself is a powerful thing. You learn how to manage money. You learn the value of money. You learn the value of your work ethic. You get recognized for that. You get promoted. You get paid for it. So a lot of those things that we began to get taught those things at home, a lot of times for the young people that I work with, they get these for the first time once we introduce them into the workplace.
Yeah, they're very tangible. They're very tactical. They're very everyday, real life. For those of us who are not living in poverty, purpose tends to be some high level sort of dream of this is how we can impact the world, and we're talking purpose, how I can impact my lives and those few people around me that I can serve. It's a whole different concept, and you are teaching that. So I want to get through all four of these, and so I want to move on to your next one, and that is we need to, or the people you're working with, and I say we all need to tackle our problem with a fighting spirit. And this is where I got victimhood because you put not being a victim to your problems. You have a fighting spirit. If you're a victim to your problems, you do not have a fighting spirit. So that fighting spirit is sort of goes along with the never quit mindset, only it's a different level of it, is it not?
It is, and I'll go back to reflected back to some of our biblical roots and kind of our underpinnings with our worldview. I'll do it one more time here. Really, the impetus for this principle comes from going back to Genesis, when God created man and woman and created the universe, and he looked at man and woman and said, he didn't say, hey, here's this universe I created, I hope it goes okay for you.
Yeah, go have fun.
So he didn't leave them in a passive posture at all. He said, go subdue this and take dominion of every living thing. And those are, dominion and subdue are really military kind of terms. They're certainly managerial stewardship kinds of terms, but he's saying, go take charge of this. Let me see what you got. And so that's really the mentality here. And, one of the most important things for all of us to do is to find ways in our life each day with big problems and small ones. We got to find ways to realize that find ways for problems to create power in us rather than giving our problems power over us.
Oh, man, you're so quotable. That is great. Say that again. So, power to...
It's important, and even little kids, you can teach little kids this when they're having a problem. It doesn't matter whatever it is. You and I both know it's like lifting weights. The only way any of us ever develop strength in our body, but it's true of our mind and our spiritual life and everything else too, is with resistance. It's just the only way you can develop strength. Resistance, always. That's it.
Resistance to fear and the fear of failure, resistance to there's nothing I can do about it, I'm incapable, and we then fall prey to the victim mentality.
Here's what happens, Charlie. We respond to problems in one of three ways every time. We either surrender to them right off the bat.
Right.
That's the outright victim. Or we say, I'm going to try to survive this. I'm not going to surrender. I'm going to try to survive this, which is a form of resilience because we want to endure it, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's good. That's the first step of gameness. So I'm not going to give in. I'm going to endure. I'm going to survive this. But surviving is a form of resilience, but it's not gameness. Gameness is subduing your problem. You're not surrendering. You're not surviving. Your goal isn't just to endure it or get by. It is actually to decide that through this problem I'm facing, I'm going to get wiser, more resourceful, stronger, better. That's what subduing is. I'm taking charge of this. I'm not. The Navy SEALs have a mantra of when they're dropped into a conflicted area where there's battle going on, they say to one another, we're not here to survive this. We're here to take charge of it. And so every day of our life, we will get up and we will face adversity or an adversary that will demand something of us. And we have to decide, are you going to surrender? Or are you going to just try to get by? Or are you going to subdue it? And
are you going to take charge here?
Bingo. I'm going to walk away from this better. I'm going to get more power in my life through what I learned through this. It's not going to have power over me. I'm not here to survive it. I'm here to take charge of this.
Love it. Okay, that's so we've got a never quit mindset. We've got a resolution to purpose and discovering what a purpose is. We've got a fighting spirit that we're going to take charge, that we are relentless. We will not fall prey to fears and victimhoods and all of that. We're just going to fight that and move on. Let's go to your last point, which is mastering your performance with the will required to act. And we need to get thoughts.
Beyond your feelings.
What's that?
The will required to act beyond your feelings.
To act beyond your feelings, and which I had written, it's that placing thoughts and feelings in the proper order. They're both valuable, but there's an order to them that is most helpful. And I'd love for you, I'd love to chat about this one.
Well, when you and I got married, and when anyone gets married,
and we actually didn't get married. It's just when you said when you and I got married. Well,
okay. I've been married to my wife for 35 years.
Yeah, and I'm 37, so 37 years married.
So when each of us got married to our spouses, there was really only one thing that day that legally had to happen to make us married. There was only one thing, and it was one question that had to be asked and answered, and the rest of it was fluff. All the rest of it was fluff. That one question was this: do you take this man or this woman to be your husband or your wife in sickness and in health? All those. And the one answer you have to give is one of two things. And what is that?
You commit for a lifetime.
Yeah, there's one answer that they want, and if you can't give that answer,
yes.
What's the answer?
Yes.
I do.
Oh, okay. So you're getting really technical on weddings.
Well,
yes.
and the reason is because
I like that. I like that.
I don't get the option of saying if I feel like it.
That's
I either
true.
do or I don't. This ceremony is about a commitment of my will through sickness and health, good times and bad, everything. And Charlie, 700,000 marriages will end in divorce this year in America. Do we need to have a conversation about the will required to act beyond your feelings or not?
Let's have a brief discussion on feelings, because I'm so feelings oriented. I'm sort of the right brain. I'm very left brain. I'm very logical, very philosophical, but I also have a strong emphasis on the right brain, on being intuitive and being empathetic, and a lot of those fall into the feelings category, and that I feel I need to listen to my inner voice, which is often very feeling-oriented, but not at the expense of my commitments, that I have to work together with these. Talk to me about that, the distinction, because I know our listeners are thinking, my listeners have heard me talk about the positivity of feelings, and you're saying, and you're suggesting, which I agree, that these feelings of what is my comfort zone? I'm not feeling into it. This is not good for me, and I really it's very ego-centered feelings.
I 100% agree with you. Feelings are obviously, and God gave us those feelings. They're critically important, and they work in tandem with our will. But feelings are great servants, but they're horrible masters. This is one of my favorite examples of this. When Jesus was in the garden the night before he was crucified, he went off and was praying, and he got frustrated with his disciples, and he said, "Gosh, can't you even pray with me for an hour? You're over there sleeping, and I'm over here in anguish." And the Bible describes him as praying and sweating blood. I mean, yeah, because he was in such anguish, and his prayer was, "Father, if this cup of suffering that I'm planning to endure, if it could pass, in other words, if there could be a plan B, if there could be another way we could achieve this, great. But if not, your will be done." And it says that he went on to endure the cross for the joy, not that he felt right then, but for the joy set before him. And so I always tell people, in Jesus' most obedient moment, he felt his greatest anguish. He didn't feel good. I mean, if you're going to talk just feelings and say, did Jesus feel like at that moment dying on the cross? I would say no. But he was obedient despite his feelings at that moment. And he was in anguish praying for God to give him, the strength to go through. Our feelings are critically important, and I in no way want to diminish those at all. In our society, however, I feel like we have allowed feelings to take on way too much authority. This year, the number one cause of death in America will be heart disease linked to obesity and inactivity. So, my own father died. He weighed over 300 pounds. He was a heavy drinker, heavy smoker, heavy eater. Lack of discipline in his life. And that's really what I'm talking about in this last one. the will required to act beyond your feelings is Jocko Willink likes to say that their discipline is freedom.
Discipline is freedom. Yep.
And William James is one of my famous old philosopher psychologists, and he has a saying. He used to say, "I don't sing because I'm happy." He said, "I'm happy because I sing." And it's kind of what I'm trying to stress here, and I'll be quiet here, is we've got to learn to act ourselves to new ways of feeling and stop foolishly pretending that we can feel our ways to new ways of acting.
That's beautiful, and I want to wrap it up with that, because I think that we need to act our way into new ways of feeling rather than feel our way into new ways of acting. David Dennis, your principles that you wrote first for your children and then for us are just so practical. It's so powerful that they're not just for the person coming out of poverty, they're for those of us middle-class people trying to live a life of wonder and of purpose and of meaning and of service. Never quit mindset, resolution to a purpose, fighting spirit, and the will required to act. Feelings over
the will required to act beyond our feelings.
The will required to act beyond our feelings. Those are so powerful, David. Thank you for your time with us and for your dedication to your mission. I am deeply impressed with what you were doing.
Charlie, thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be with you. Love the work that you're doing, and I look forward to coming on again and having more conversation if the opportunity presents itself.
It shall. So David, I have a link to your book. Is there another way you want people to get more information about you?
No, the book website, GamenessLeadership.com, is a great place to go to learn more about the book, about me. If you have interest, as far as me speaking or doing other podcasts or things like that, you can get information there about me. You can get the book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or other.
Yeah, I've got the Amazon link on it. So this is GamenessLeadership.com.
Correct.
Okay, I will include that. Thank you once again for participating with me. And
truly an honor.
Oh, mine as well. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning into the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.